Part 1: The Invitation. The whole chain of events that would come to define my life began with something as trivial as a misaddressed email. It was early spring of 1994, and I was a 22-year-old administrative assistant living in a shoebox apartment 3 floors above a bakery that started proofing dough at 4 in the morning. The email was meant for another Rebecca, this I learned later, but it landed in my inbox instead, bright with digital confetti, promising an unforgettable evening hosted by a friend of an art dealer whose name sounded vaguely French and definitely expensive. That Saturday I spent what felt like hours in front of my cracked bathroom mirror trying to tame a halo of frizz. I borrowed a dress from my roommate, a black silk slip that clung where it should have floated and floated where it should have clung. Still, it made me feel like someone who owned more than 5 mismatched forks and a disintegrating futon. The city was beginning to bloom, and the air carried that faint scent of wet pavement and lilac buds, hope mingled with exhaust. I remember thinking, as I climbed the subway stairs, that my life, like the weather, was on the cusp of something brighter. The loft building was a cathedral of exposed brick and industrial windows. Music, some throbbing remix that was fashionable for exactly 3 months, pulsed through the stairwell. On the 4th floor landing, a woman in feathered eyeliner scribbled my name on a sticker. "Hello, I am Rebecca." I pasted it below my collarbone, took a plastic flute of champagne from a passing tray, and tried to look as though I attended parties hosted by minor art dealers all the time. The room glittered with people who wore their confidence like high-gloss lacquer. And then I saw him. He was leaning against a support beam, sleeves rolled to his elbows, laughing with his entire torso in a way that made you want to be the source of that laughter. His hair was the color of forests after rain, his eyes bright as bottle glass held to sunlight. When our gazes locked, it felt like missing a step on the stairs. Gravity lurched. He smiled, small and private, as though we shared a secret joke. I did not know his name. I did not know anything but the sudden certainty that I would remember this moment even after I'd forgotten my own voicemail password. Part 2: A Night Written in Half-Light. We didn't meet so much as fall into each other's orbit. A mutual friend, whose face I can barely recall now, performed the introduction, and for the briefest moment we acknowledged the formal niceties. His name, Daniel, mine, a handshake lingering a second longer than polite. Conversation with him felt less like exchanging information and more like inhaling a richer atmosphere. We spoke of nothing monumental, favorite guitar solos, books half-read, which constellation would be easiest to rename if we were suddenly given authority over the sky. Yet every word felt precise, laid into place like tesserae in a mosaic only we could see. Around us, the loft party scintillated, couples spinning like loose sparklers, laughter bursting in grenade pockets, paint-splattered canvases propped against brick as though the walls themselves had begun to molt color. Yet the noise blurred to watercolor edges at the perimeter of my attention. We migrated toward the fire escape for air. New York night stretched below, a river of taxi headlights winding between monoliths. Wind tangled my hair. Daniel tucked a strand behind my ear with a gentleness almost startling. I watched him do it as though spying on a stranger and myself simultaneously. He told me he was passing through town, on loan to a research lab in Zurich for the next morning's flight. I teased him, suggesting scientists were merely kids who never got over dismantling clocks, and he laughed that full-bodied laugh again. A hush unfurled between us, wide and soft. We both sensed the hour slipping, each tick grazing our skin like cold raindrops. When he asked if I wanted to leave, I heard in the question an echo, "Will you remember this?" I said yes. The taxi smelled of pine air freshener and city secrets. We kissed before the first traffic light. In my apartment, we moved with the urgent reverence of people borrowing time that belonged to someone else. We did not speak of consequences or tomorrow's geography, did not discuss surnames or exchange phone numbers. We spoke with our bodies, whispers along collarbones, fingertips mapping miles of skin, 2 cartographers drafting an atlas that would vanish with dawn. When morning seeped through the blackout curtains, he dressed quietly, pressed a kiss to the ridge of my knuckles. It felt like a period at the end of an unfinished sentence. "Goodbye, Rebecca," he said, and the door clicked shut. I lay there, heart drumming in the hush, already rehearsing ways to etch the night into permanence. Outside, delivery trucks groaned awake. I told myself not to romanticize a silhouette. I told myself the ache would fade. I did not know it yet, but something of him, two somethings, would stay with me far longer than any ache. After he left, I showered, letting hot water pound against my scalp as if it could wash away the certainty that something irreversible had transpired. The tiles fogged, turning the small bathroom into a cloud chamber where memory refracted, his laugh, the soft curse he muttered when he dropped a shoe, the way he had stared at me in the taxi as though photographing my face for later reference. I tried to catalogue him objectively: height, approximate age, the scar along his left eyebrow, but the inventory collapsed under the weight of subjectivity. By the afternoon I had convinced myself a fine story was enough. Some people collected fridge magnets from exotic cities. Perhaps I would collect One Extraordinary Night, pressed like a flower in the album of my 20s. I did not yet suspect that the story would grow teeth and bones, would shift from anecdote to prologue. Not yet. Sometimes an entire future hides inside a single hour, quiet as an embryo before its first heartbeat. Part 3: The Tremor Under Everyday Things. For 6 weeks life marched in its ordinary cadence. I filed expense reports, restocked copier paper, argued with my landlord about the perpetually hissing radiator. I dated a man from accounting for a short while, mostly because he knew where to find street corner vendors who sold warm peanuts in newsprint cones, but when he kissed me I found myself measuring the angle of his jawline against an imaginary silhouette and feeling disloyal to a memory. I told myself it was nostalgia wearing perfume. Then came the nausea. At first I blamed stress from end-of-quarter madness, blamed a virulent stomach bug circulating our office, blamed everything except what, deep down, I understood. One Sunday evening I stood in the sparkling aisles of a pharmacy, dazed by the fluorescence, and bought a pregnancy test the way one might purchase a self-help book in a language they did not speak. That night I paced my apartment as the plastic wand whispered its result onto a tiny window. 2 lines bloomed, faint but unmistakable. In that moment the floor didn't fall away so much as the ceiling lifted, exposing a sky both terrifying and wondrously large. I sat on the floor, knees against my chest, listening to the upstairs neighbor practice scales on an out-of-tune clarinet. My mind ran inventory, my savings, $326, my support system, one overworked mother in Florida, one roommate about to move in with her boyfriend, my job, no maternity leave, no health insurance beyond the bare minimum. The future felt like a lens pulled infinitely out of focus, light and color, no shapes. Yet beneath all that terror a thrill coiled, a defiant beacon: something loved is coming. The first ultrasound delivered the next surprise: twins. 2 flickering heartbeats on a monochrome screen. I laughed so hard the obstetrician gently suggested I breathe. "Double blessings," she said. Blessings. My laughter turned to tears then, because blessings are heavy. They require strong arms to carry. I wrote Daniel a letter I never sent. I had no address. I poured everything onto the page: 2 heartbeats, my fear, the way our night had lingered like a broken hymn. I folded the letter and kept it in a shoebox beneath my bed, alongside ticket stubs and Polaroids of lesser adventures. Weeks blurred into doctor appointments and ravenous midnight cravings. My body became a house I merely rented, 2 tenants revised the blueprints daily. I sensed already that motherhood would demand a surrender larger than anything I had practiced. I read parenting guides until words curdled, but nothing prepared me for what happened 3 months before my due date, when an envelope arrived, postmarked from nowhere, containing a cashier's check for $4,000 and no return address. At first I assumed it was an error, perhaps an accidental inheritance from a distant relative with questionable accounting skills. I called the issuing bank. They confirmed the check was authentic but could not disclose the sender. The funds wired effortlessly into my account, a silent lifeline. I told no one. That night I lay awake, palm against my rounding belly, and felt the twins somersault as though celebrating. I whispered into the dark, "Your father is kind." It was the first time I spoke of him in the present tense. The following month another check arrived. And the next. The cadence became reliable, like lunar phases. Every 13th of the month, $4,000 materialized. I marked each deposit on a calendar that soon resembled a constellation chart. By then, panic had ceded ground to determination. I found a midwife, enrolled in night classes for certification as a medical coder, a job I could do remotely once the babies came. Hope, it turned out, was a muscle. The deposits were protein, feeding its growth. Part 4, The Arrival of Nova and Orion. They barreled into the world on a sweltering August afternoon, 2 minutes and 46 seconds apart. Nova emerged first, red-faced and hollering as though filing an official complaint about the lighting. Orion followed, quieter but alert, eyes already scanning for constellations only he could see. I named them for the night sky that had watched their conception, for the promise of vastness. The delivery was messy, magnificent, nearly catastrophic, a cord wrapped, a blood pressure plummet, a midwife calling orders with calm ferocity. When they finally rested on my chest, slick with vernix and the rawness of arrival, I felt something click into place, tectonic and irreversible. Fear remained, but it dwarfed beneath awe. The apartment transformed into command central. Diapers stacked like ceasefire sandbags, bottles sterilized in militant rows, lullabies on repeat until my ears buzzed with phantom melodies. Yet between the exhaustion, joy flooded in sudden bursts, Nova gripping my finger with improbable strength, Orion's first crooked smile, unsure of facial geography. Every night I read to them from the same dog-eared astronomy guide Daniel and I had referenced that long-ago party night. "Stars are stories," I told them. "You are mine." Meanwhile, the anonymous deposits continued. They paid for pediatric visits, bulk boxes of wipes, rent in a slightly larger apartment with functioning radiators. I tracked the origin obsessively, ATM routes, clearinghouses, routing numbers that traced to shell branches that dissolved like mirages when I approached. Whoever sent the money was determined to remain invisible. Some nights, fatigue cracked me open. I would stand at the window, twins finally asleep, staring at the city's scattered lights and fantasize about Daniel doing the same somewhere else, maybe whispering their names to a darkened lab. Distance became a dimension I could almost map, 1 unit of longing equaled 1 city block. Year 1 sprinted into Year 2, then 3. Nova learned to walk with the reckless confidence of a cartoon coyote chasing beyond the cliff edge, trusting the air. Orion spoke in full sentences before most kids mastered vowels, voice soft as graphite. They balanced each other, her comet energy, his lunar calm. I felt our trio forming an orbit that required no fourth body, yet the shadow of their father remained a peripheral moon, distant but influential, tugging tides we felt without seeing the source. On the twins' 5th birthday the deposits topped $250,000 cumulatively. We celebrated with papier-mâché planets suspended from the ceiling. Nova insisted Mercury be purple. Orion corrected her that artistic expression trumped astrophysics at parties. When I tucked them in that night, they asked again, "Where's Dad?" I gave my careful answer, "Somewhere he can watch the same sky we do." It satisfied them, for now. I kissed their foreheads, whispering silent gratitude to the man who had vanished but never abandoned us entirely. Later, alone with the hum of the refrigerator, I opened the shoebox that held mementos, the unlabeled cassette mixtape Daniel had slipped into my coat pocket that night, a compilation ranging from Bowie to a live recording of a cello suite, the unsent letter, and photocopies of the deposit receipts. I listened to the tape, letting the music stitch memory to present. On track 7, a pianist missed a note then laughed, Daniel's laugh. I replayed that fragment until the tape warbled. It felt like touching a shoreline washed by familiar waves. In those years I drafted countless emails to non-existent addresses, daniel@anywhere.com, daniel.scientist@gmail, Daniel_last known at fate.org. I never hit send. The words were compass needles spinning without true north. But motherhood granted little time for reverie. There were school supplies to label and colds to treat and a mortgage to manage once I bought a modest row house, courtesy of the accumulative generosity. Life rushed forward, tugging me by the apron strings as surely as my children did. I slept hard, dreamed seldom, loved fiercely. Part 5, The Science of Absence. By their 10th birthday, the twins had grown curious enough to stage formal interrogations. They presented a list of hypotheses about their father's whereabouts: astronaut on covert Mars mission, secret agent hiding us for our safety, cursed prince trapped as a tree. Each theory was illustrated with watercolors, a cross-section of imagination and longing. I recognized the early symptoms of a quest and knew I couldn't inoculate them forever. The deposits never faltered. Month after month, like the tick of a well-wound clock, $4,000. I calculated once while waiting at a pediatric dentist, by the twins' 18th birthday the anonymous benefactor would have contributed nearly $900,000. That sum sat heavy on the scales of gratitude and guilt. I used it responsibly: tutors, braces, a second-hand Subaru, weekend science camps, but feared it might someday demand reckoning. When the twins hit middle school, I decided to hire a private investigator. He was a retired NYPD detective named Alvarez who smelled faintly of peppermints and old printer ink. I handed him everything: the mixtape, the letter, a composite sketch assembled from my memory, and a forensic artist who owed Alvarez favors. The sketch looked like an older, more tired version of the man from my memory. Time had already begun erasing him at the edges. Alvarez chased leads like a bloodhound: passenger manifests, academic conference rosters, grant recipients with middle names starting with D, Swiss laboratory visiting scholars in the mid-90s. He found 5 Daniels who could have fit, interviewed 3, eliminated all. Each dead end felt like punctured hope, slowly deflating. Meanwhile, Nova discovered soccer and transformed into a midfield comet, while Orion joined the robotics club and spoke fluent Arduino. Evenings were a carousel of practice pickups and soldering fumes. In quiet moments I wondered if they would one day resent me for the blank on their birth certificates. I rehearsed explanations: a brief but beautiful accident, a love story compressed into one night, evidence that sometimes the universe conspires in single strokes rather than long arcs. High school arrived. Nova dyed her hair magenta, Orion grew tall and quietly noble. They fought like binary stars caught in mutual gravity, colliding then slingshotting away only to return. I watched them claim their identities, twin yet distinct, and felt a strange gratitude for Daniel's absence. It granted them space to grow without the shadow of paternal comparison. Still, I caught Nova staring at father's cheering on the sidelines, saw Orion flinch at Father's Day assignments. Their longing had become a quiet meteor shower, spectacular, unstoppable, mostly happening out of sight. Alvarez eventually folded the case. "Your ghost doesn't want to be found," he said, kinder than the words. I paid his invoice with anonymous money and tucked the report beside the mixtape. That night at the kitchen table, plastic gear from Orion's 3D printer turning between my fingers, I whispered into the hush, I tried. Perhaps Daniel heard, wherever he was. The deposits continued. Part 6, Orbits Expanding. The summer the twins turned 18, we celebrated beneath paper lanterns strung across the backyard. Nova had been accepted to a Division I soccer program 3 states away, Orion earned a scholarship to an engineering college on the opposite coast. I feigned bravery, toasted their futures, swallowed the ache of an approaching empty nest. Under the lantern glow their faces looked half-grown and half-remembered, the same newborn expressions, stretched by time. Before they left, I sat them down, slid the shrine shoebox across the table, and told them everything. I showed them deposit records, Alvarez's report, the unsent letter, the mixtape. Nova pressed play on our battered boombox. The cello suite filled the kitchen, raw and unpolished, bow scratching slightly between sustained notes. When track 7 played, the pianist's mistaken Daniel's laugh cracked the room open. Orion closed his eyes as though memorizing the sound file into his marrow. They did not ask why I never tried harder, it was obvious I had. Instead they each embraced me, and it felt less like forgiveness than affirmation, we were already enough. With tuition covered by scholarships, and the anonymous stipend, I found myself with financial breathing room for the first time in 2 decades. I quit medical coding and began studying horticulture, resurrecting a childhood dream of running a greenhouse. Plants, I reasoned, were easier to understand than people, they thrived on light, water, and honest attention. Still, on the 13th of every month, I logged into online banking to confirm the deposit. It arrived without fail, like a heartbeat, like a reassurance whispered through fiber optic cables. One evening I calculated, 36 checks remained until the twins would turn 30. The arbitrary math felt ominous, a countdown whose significance I couldn't parse. I dated once or twice, tentative steps into midlife romance, but always felt Daniel's silhouette lurking in peripheral vision, an impossible benchmark of intimacy. How does one compete with a myth? Men found my independence alluring until they sensed the invisible fourth chair at the table, reserved for a ghost benefactor. I learned to keep certain chapters of my history closed. Meanwhile, Nova thrived, captaining her team, sending me clips of improbable bicycle kicks. Orion patented a component for a low-cost prosthetic finger and mailed me a prototype that waved when heated. I attended conferences where he presented, matches where she played, traveling on anonymous dime. Each time I sat in the audience and watched my children own their brilliance, I whispered a silent thanks to the benefactor who made their ascent less steep. Gratitude outweighed curiosity, almost. But curiosity, like ivy, finds cracks. I started a spreadsheet, charting deposit timestamps, trace routing, fluctuations in clearing batches. Patterns emerged, funds cleared through different intermediary banks every 4 years, an electoral cycle of secrecy. When I confronted a bank manager for answers, he leaned back, hands folded, and said, "Some patrons value privacy more than interest rates." I left with nothing but a lollipop and deeper resolve. I began to dream of him again, not Daniel as he was, but as he might be now, silver threaded through hair, lines at the corners of eyes, laugh mellowed like aged whiskey. Each dream ended with him standing just beyond a pane of glass, mouthing words I could never hear. Part 7, The Quiet Before the Shift. The calendar turned, inexorable. Nova signed with a professional club overseas. Orion accepted a postdoc fellowship in applied robotics. I expanded my greenhouse into a small business, propagating rare orchids that drew collectors from miles away. Life felt abundant, layered shades of green and wild possibility. Yet beneath that canopy pulsed the steady metronome of the monthly deposits, each one reminding me that my independence sprouted from soil someone else had enriched. I wondered if the sense of composure I flaunted was mine or rented. Then, one gray January, the year the twins would turn 29, the deposit did not arrive. At first I blamed a banking holiday, a clerical hiccup. I refreshed the browser hourly, heart thudding. Days crawled, the account remained silent. After 3 weeks I stared at the barren transactions log and felt abandonment all over again, doubled by years of expectation. I didn't tell Nova or Orion. Instead I called Alvarez, who now consulted for corporate security. He offered to reopen the search. "Maybe your ghost lost his way," he said. I almost corrected him, maybe he lost his life, but the word stuck. I resumed living within my means alone. The greenhouse profit covered bills, but I felt strangely lightheaded buying groceries without unseen subsidy. Dependency, even benevolent, warps perception. On the 1st of March I received certified mail, a plain envelope, return address a law firm I did not recognize. Inside lay a single-page letter on thick cream paper and a safety deposit box key. My stomach dropped, the world narrowed to the perimeter of that page. The letter, typed in formal legal language, conveyed condolences for the recent passing of Dr. Daniel Hale, beloved colleague and noted biophysicist, and informed me that per his testament, A box numbered 1477 at a midtown bank was held in my name. There was no mention of how the law firm had connected me to him, only instructions to retrieve the contents at my earliest convenience. I folded to the kitchen floor, letter crinkling in my fist. For years I had rehearsed meeting him again, imagined conversations enlightened by decades of context. Now that door was sealed by death. Grief for a stranger man flooded me, surprising in its ferocity. I mourned not only him but the impossible reunion, the questions forever unanswered. 3 days later I stood in the bank's fluorescent lobby, key trembling in my palm. The vault attended by a polite woman with mauve lipstick opened with a mechanical sigh. Box 1477 slid out heavy. In the privacy cubicle, I lifted the lid. On top lay a photograph, Daniel on a mountain ridge, hair whipped by wind, smile unchanged but matured, eyes crinkling. He held a slate board that read Zurich, 2006. Beneath the photo rested a stack of ledgers documenting every deposit, dates, confirmation numbers, handwritten notes, for Nova's braces, for Orion's invention materials, for Becca's greenhouse dream. The meticulous care stunned me, each fiscal act was deliberate love. Below the ledgers I found a sealed envelope addressed in his handwriting, for Rebecca, to be opened alone. I had not seen his penmanship before, yet it felt familiar, confident strokes echoing the assuredness of our brief night. My hands shook so violently I feared tearing the flap. The letter inside was 6 pages, dated 2 months prior. He wrote that he had followed my life from afar, respecting boundaries. He confessed that the night of the party was, for him, a rebellion against a career drowning in data and isolation, that our connection restored his faith in spontaneity. He discovered my pregnancy through mutual friends but believed his life, constant relocations, classified research, unsafe for a family. Instead, he vowed to support us unseen until the twins reached 30, at which point he hoped they, and I, would no longer need him. He apologized, profusely, eloquently, for absence, for secrecy, for every question I would carry. He wrote that Nova's fierce spirit and Orion's quiet brilliance were gifts from both of us, that he knew them through school newsletters, published papers, streamed games. He ended with, "If love is measured by presence, I have failed. But if love can be counted by care, let this care bear witness." Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the pages to my heart, feeling the imprint of his words, the belated gravity. Part 8, Telling the Stars Their Story. I waited until Nova and Orion were home for their 29th birthday celebration, a rare convergence between league play and semester breaks, before revealing Daniel's legacy. We sat in the greenhouse after hours, the air fragrant with jasmine, fairy lights strung between rafters. The box 1477 rested on a potting table like a treasure chest. I recounted the saga, the missing deposit, the lawyer's letter, the vault. When I read Daniel's apology aloud, my voice cracked on the word failed. Nova, eyes shining, reached across the table. Orion, ever composed, wiped his cheeks with his sleeve. Grief braided through gratitude, tightening and loosening by turns. We spread the ledgers across the table. Orion traced the columns with engineer precision, marveling at annotations tailored to moments he'd never known were visible, Nova's fractured wrist cast fee, Orion's robotics nationals airfare. Evidence that their father had watched from constellations of data, guardian by algorithm. How do we grieve someone we never met? Nova asked quietly. I said, the same way we love them, imaginatively, honestly. We decided to mourn by storytelling. For the rest of the night we swapped memories like trading cards, the first time Orion built a motor that spun too fast, the day Nova scored the winning goal with a sprained ankle. We wove Daniel into each scene, leaving space for his imagined laughter. In the weeks that followed, we organized a memorial suited to Daniel's covert devotion, a night hike up Bear Mountain, where the sky unspooled unpolluted. We invited only those who understood the shape of this grief, Alvarez, a couple of Daniel's colleagues who had reached out through the law firm, and ourselves. On the summit we projected the mixtape through a portable speaker. Track 7 played, the pianist's laugh threading through frosted air. Orion pointed out constellations while Nova released a biodegradable lantern carrying a handwritten message, "Thank you for every sunrise." The next morning, sunrise staining clouds apricot, we read Daniel's will, which included a final trust, funds for my greenhouse expansion, seed money for Nova's future sports outreach nonprofit, capital for Orion's robotics startup. The amounts were generous but not ostentatious, calculated, as always, to enable rather than overshadow. In the aftermath, headlines might have read like a human interest piece, "Mysterious benefactor funds family for 30 years, but we avoided publicity." The world loves tidy narratives, and ours was not worked, tender. Instead, we wrote our own epilogue. Nova established a youth athletic scholarship called the Hale Comet Fund. Orion developed prosthetic-friendly robotic limbs and named the flagship model the Nova series. My greenhouse erected a research wing dedicated to endangered pollinators and dubbed it the Orion Conservatory. Sometimes, hiking alone, I listen to that mixtape track and imagine Daniel walking beside me. I tell him what he missed: Orion's first shave, Nova's first red card, the time we laughed until we cried over a burnt Thanksgiving turkey. In these imagined conversations, he listens, hands in pockets, grateful. Grief, I've learned, is just love walking through fire. We walked, our family of 3 made 4 by memory, and found the burn bearable. That night on Bear Mountain, as the last lantern sputtered out, I whispered into the dark, "Thank you for the stars," and I swear, somewhere beyond Orion's belt, a satellite blinked twice in reply. Part 9, 30 Revolutions. On the twins' 30th birthday we gathered again, this time in the greenhouse's new atrium. Morning light cascaded through paneled glass, turning us to silhouettes among orchids. There was no anonymous deposit that day, nor did we expect one. The account remained still, as though a tide had receded, leaving tide pools rich with what had been. Nova arrived from Spain with a duffel bursting with gifts, saffron, match-worn cleats for auction at her non-profit gala, a packet of Catalonian sunflower seeds. Orion flew in from California, lugging a prototype forearm that could translate muscle twitches into sign language. They ribbed each other, adult laughter harmonizing with the echoes of childhood. We toasted with elderflower cordial and champagne. I spoke, voice steady, 30 years ago today, the universe gave me 2 miracles and a mystery. The miracles stand before me. The mystery has become history. It rhymed unintentionally, we laughed. Later, after cake crumbs were cleared, Orion produced a small lacquered box. Inside lay a necklace, a simple silver chain bearing a pendant shaped like a partial ellipse. His robotics team had milled it from titanium reclaimed from a decommissioned satellite. "To keep Dad's orbit close," he said. The metal warmed instantly against my skin. Nova, grinning, presented tickets to Zurich. "You never got to see where he spent those years," she said. "We can retrace his sky." My throat thickened. The trip, we agreed, would be our next chapter of connection, a pilgrimage not of guilt but curiosity. That evening I lay in bed, pendant warm against my sternum, itinerary printouts on the nightstand. I replayed memory reels, the loft party, the taxicab, the gentle way Daniel had tucked hair behind my ear. Those moments had once felt like prologue, now they were a trilogy's genesis. The ache that remained was not vacancy but echo, a reminder that love's physics allow energy to persist, refracted through new prisms. In the morning I emailed Alvarez a final thank you and wired him a bonus from my own savings. He replied with a single line, "Mysteries solved, make room for new adventures." He was right. The hole Daniel left was now filled with purpose. Planning the Zurich trip became a collaborative puzzle. Nova maneuvered airline points, Orion booked a research tour at the university where Daniel had lectured. I scoured journals, finding papers Daniel co-authored on molecular resonance imaging. His author photo showed deeper laugh lines, proof that the sound I loved had endured. One afternoon, cataloging plants, I considered how a greenhouse resembles a life, panes of transparent truth, steel frames of structure, controlled climates, yet at its heart growth remains unpredictable. Seeds sprout or wither, blossoms arrive early or stubbornly delay. Daniel had tried to orchestrate from afar, but ultimately life demanded we cultivate our own gardens. I whispered a promise to the rows of wax begonias, we'll take it from here. As departure day neared, I penned a letter addressed to whom it may concern in the future. I wrote about spontaneous nights and long debts, about twins who became whole despite absence. I sealed the letter with wax and placed it beside Daniel's, a dialogue across decades, bound by paper. We flew 3 weeks later, sunrise chasing us across the Atlantic. From the airplane window I traced constellations unnamed, felt the pendant cool against my skin, and understood that in some parallel sky Daniel watched, satisfied. I rested my head on Nova's shoulder, Orion snored softly beside us, and between us, though unseen, sat a sense of completion. I have learned that love can be present even when the lover is not, that absence is a shape we can grow around. Children inherit not only genetics but stories, and stories, when tended, bear fruit long after the teller is gone. 30 revolutions of Earth around the sun, every one scarred and blessed. The future stretched before us, bright and indistinct. I fell asleep dreaming of alpine air and midnight constellations shared with my grown children, and with the man whose love had been a silent aurora across our lives, visible only when we looked up, hearts wide open to the dark.